Hey, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are all having an excellent day. In today's video, we are going to be continuing on with episode 4 of the auto layout intro series. Now, what exactly are we going to build in today's lesson? Well, let's kind of take a look at where we left off in the last video. And basically, we have this nice looking page that is kind of conforming to auto layout constraints properly so that we can rotate and also support landscape orientation. So that's pretty good, right? But we're not able to swipe through pages inside of our app just yet. And what we're going to build out today is sort of a layout guide or a walkthrough type of feature where we can support swiping from one page to the next, kind of like that. And you'll find this type of functionality in a lot of iOS apps today. So it's very, very useful for you to know how to build out a feature such as this. All right, so without further ado, let's dive straight into Xcode and see what kind of code we need to write out for this feature. All right, so here's the code for the project that we left off in episode 3. You can find a link down in the description below if you haven't watched that lesson yet. So what I'm gonna do is to just simply run this application to kind of show you that this code actually renders out our application to look like this, and we cannot do any of the swiping just yet. So how do we implement the swiping? Well, we have to do it in a couple of different steps. So let's start off by using a UICollectionViewController that allows us to build out little tiny cells such as this. And I'm going to transform these little square blocks right here into a full page like that. And then we'll implement the swiping feature that allows us to go left and right between each cell. So this is quite often built with a UI page view controller, but I actually like using a UI collection view controller because it's much more flexible, and I'll show you some of the benefits of doing this a little bit later on. So let's go ahead and build out these little cells right here by going into our project, and I'm going to create a new file. Let's just use a Swift file, and I'm going to call this perhaps swiping controller. That allows us to do the swiping, right? And inside of here, we want to import UIKit, and that allows us to create this class right here called UICollectionViewController, like that. So all of these UI namespace classes are all available from UIKit. And this class, we will call it whatever we named this file to be, which is just swiping controller. That's just a standard convention that we follow when we program. So it makes our code very easy to maintain and follow along if you're just someone else looking at the code. All right, so viewDidLoad we'll call like that with a override and calling super viewDidLoad just so that we make sure our view controller is set up correctly. And inside of here, I'm going to change the collection views background color with that bit of code. And let's change it to something perhaps like .green. All right, so this is the basis for which we want to use to build out this collection view right here. And how do I place these 4 cells inside of my collection view? Well, why don't we first try to show this collection view being green inside of our application first. So how do we do this inside of code? Well, it's pretty easy. If you go into app delegate and go into this function called did finish launching with options. And so in here, we're going to construct our application programmatically because we're not really using the storyboard inside of this tutorial. So to construct our app from scratch, we first need some kind of window that will hold our view controllers. And that's how you construct your window, and you want to make it visible as well. So this is how we build out our app in code. And then the next thing we need to do is to stuff some kind of view controller inside of our window. So you say window root view controller equals something. So this something can be pretty much anything. So let's say random view controller. See controller right here. Let's just make it a UI view controller. Construct it with an empty constructor. Set the random view controller's background color. That's not what I want. Background. Nope. View.background color is the proper bit of syntax, and let's just set it to .purple. Okay, so good stuff there. And I'm going to set the entire Windows root view controller to be this random view controller right here that has a purple background. So So running this bit of code, we have this view controller that's purple. So good stuff there. Now, why don't we replace this random view controller with this swiping controller so that we can start implementing cells. So it's very easy to do this once you kind of know what the code looks like, obviously. So let's see, what does the code need to be? Well, let's say let swiping controller equals this new swiping controller instance. And to kind of make an instance out of it, we need to call this constructor using collection view layout. So that's what I'm going to do. And this layout parameter right here, I'm going to define up above with let layout equals UI collection view flow layout. I think this is what I need. And I'm just going to construct it with an empty constructor. So this might be a confusing class for some of you guys, but basically the documentation, which is very useful to read, says that it's a concrete layout object that organizes items into a grid with an optional header and footer views. So basically it allows our collection view to be in a grid style. So we're going to go ahead and stuff that layout as our collection view layout. And then for the random view controller, we will replace it with swiping controller. So good stuff there. And now I'm going to go into swiping controller, put a breakpoint on view.load. You'll see that the code executes, and then at the very end, it hits this breakpoint on line 16, meaning we are now inside of view.load. We hit the continue button right there. It sets the collection view's background color to this green, and our application is pretty much in a good state for us to start playing around with. All right, so I'm gonna hit Command 1, which brings me back to the Project Explorer. It's a really good shortcut to use to save yourself a little bit of time. Now, how do we go from this green controller to these 4 red squares? Well, if you know how collection view operates, you pretty much needs 2 functions to be overridden to provide us with these red cells right here. So the first function is to just say number of items in section, and we'll just return 4. So obviously we have 4 cells right here, so we return 4. And section, for some of you that don't know what it is, collection view can have multiple sections so that you can provide multiple items per section. It's a very flexible and configurable component, which is why I really like this class a whole lot. So in order to kind of get our cells inside of our green background thing here, we can do something else, but let's try to run our code to see whether or not it is even runnable. So as you can see, the code runs and it is crashing right above inside of this little bit of code right here that says that the collection view's data source did not return a valid cell for index path. So what exactly does that mean? Well, because we're returning 4 items inside of, section 0, I guess is what you can call it, we need to return some cells for each one of these items. So that means we need a second method called cell for item at index path, and this needs to return some kind of cell. So cell, I'm going to dequeue it from my collection view. So let cell equals dequeue with reuse identifier. I'm going to say cell ID for the reuse identifier, and index path we're going to copy from this method here. And then finally, we just need to return this cell. So I'm going to try to set the cell's background color like so, equals perhaps .red, and try to run this application one more time. It is going to crash because we haven't registered a cell for the cell ID yet, so you're going to see it crash. And over here, if you look at the little bit of code, it says that I could not dequeue a view for this UI's collection view cell thing with the identifier of cell ID. So to fix this, we simply register a cell using the cell ID string. And we do that inside of view.load. And we just say collection view.register class with this cell ID thing from down here. So I'm going to copy that, put in a string, put in cell ID, and now we are ready to register a class for our red cells inside of here. And you can use a plain old UI collection view cell, and that's kind of a class that we'll use just for now. And basically .self is the class for UI collection view self, And this register method takes in a class, and each one of these cells right here is an instance of that class. And every time you dequeue a cell using the cell ID, you get an instance of whatever you're registering the collection view with. So that's kind of how all that good stuff works. And we will kind of take a look at how we can modify these cells now to be an entire page like this right here. So this is very simple if you provide a size for each one of these individual cells. So to do that, we will try to say down here inside of the view controller, size for item. So you can see it doesn't provide us with the autocomplete. And to fix that, you conform your swiping controller to this UICollectionView delegate flow layout protocol. So it's a very long name. And this protocol, let's read out the description. It says that the UICollectionView delegate flow layout protocol defines methods that let you coordinate with the UICollectionView flow layout from earlier. And it allows you to implement a grid-based layout. The methods of this protocol define the size of items and the spacing between items in the grid. So a long description, but essentially this will let us provide size for item. And this right here, we need to return some kind of CG size object, and we'll construct it with a width of, let's say, 100. That sounds like a good dummy width and height for us to kind of play around with in our simulator. And once this is up and running, you'll see that each one of our cells are red with 100 width and 100 height, like so. So pretty good stuff there. And now let's make it the entire simulator's size or entire view controller's size by returning the correct CG size of width of view frame width and view frame height, like that. And then we'll run our application one more time. And that will allow our cells to be the entire width like that and the entire height like so. So really good stuff there, and let's see what else we can do so that we can provide sort of horizontal swiping ability for our collection view. So where do we go to provide horizontal swipiness? Well, there's actually two ways of doing this, and I'll show you perhaps the first way, which is to go back to app delegate, and this layout guy, this little instance that we have here, we can say scroll direction equals dot horizontal, and that's probably the easier way of doing this, and I'll just leave it at that. So now that our swiping controller is up and running, we can kind of swipe horizontally instead of vertically for the scroll direction. So if I just slide it over here, you kind of see it kind of flows to the left and the right, kind of like that. And it doesn't have this snapping behavior or this paging behavior that we're really looking for inside of our collection view. So let's implement that by going into swiping controller, and I'm going to say collection view dot is paging enabled and set this parameter equal to true. And while I'm here, I'm going to turn the collection view's background color to white instead of green, because I don't really want to see that greenish color, although it's very Christmas themey, right? So now that paging is enabled, you can see that every time I swipe over, it kind of snaps to a certain X value. So you're probably asking me or asking yourself, how come it's not snapping to the correct page and it has this little bit of spacing available? So that is occurring inside of our application because there is this spacing parameter that we also need to provide that spaces out each cell. Now the default value is 10, that's why you see this white line right here. So there is one other method that we need to override called minimum line spacing for section at, and again section is just section 0 for our first section. And if we set the minimum line spacing to 0, you see that there's a scroll bar down here, and every time I swipe between pages, you don't see that line anymore. However, you can't really distinguish each page from another right now. And that's a little bit of a problem, which I will fix by going into cell for item. And instead of just setting the background color to a red, why don't we do something a little bit more interesting by saying index path, which is this parameter right here. And this guy has a property on it called row, but instead of using a row, we actually use item, which specifies the number of the row inside of our collection view. So a little bit confusing, but this is 0 for the first cell and 1 for the second cell because everything is 0 based. So index path.item, I'm going to modulo, I think that's the correct term for that, by 2 and say if it's equal to 0, we'll set it to red, otherwise we'll say green, like that. And then I think we need a question mark right there. So this little bit of code, which might be somewhat unfamiliar to you guys, basically this means that if the index path is divisible by 2, then we'll set it to red for the background color, and that's the first cell. Otherwise, we'll just set it to the green color like that. And that's how you kind of make your cells go from one color to another, alternating, such as this. So that's a little bit of trickery with math that I really like to show people how to perform. And sometimes you'll even be asked how to do this inside of an interview question. So make sure you know how to do this. Okay, so where do we want to go from here now that we have our cells being able to page like this? Well, we are actually ready to kind of move on from all of these screens and actually bringing our original elements into each one of these cells right here. So this green cell, this red cell. We can bring in the bear paw image and also the description text view down here. And how do we do that? Well, there are a couple of good ways of starting this step, which is to register a custom cell for our collection view. So instead of using this guy right here, which is a default UI collection view cell, we're going to use a custom cell. And the reason is because we can't really modify that default cell. For example, we want to add that bear paw image view. So let's just say page cell for each one of these pages. I think that's a good name. Let's just use a Swift file, import UI kit up here, create this new class called page cell, like so, and use UICollectionViewCell as the parent class. Now inside of here, I will say init frame and call super init frame and use the frame parameter from the top constructor guy right here. There's going to be this error, which I'll fix simply by doing that. You're going to have to do this regardless of what kind of class you override, so just make sure to have that. Otherwise, your code will not compile and Xcode is not going to allow you to run your code. So I'm going to set this background cell or page cell's background color to something like perhaps .purple. Yeah, that's a good color. And now we can use this page cell as the swiping controller's cell ID cell. So page cell.self. And we'll try to run this, but you're not going to see the purple color because we're overriding it with this little bit of code on line 32. So you'll see that it's still red and green. I'm going to comment that out, run it again, and inside of page cell, I'll use a breakpoint on line 15. Every time the collection view tries to dequeue a cell, it executes the init with frame constructor, and it sets that cell's background color to purple like that. And so each one of my cells are doing that now. You know, if you want to change it to yellow, you can do that as well. So that's how you register a custom cell in code, and this is how you start to add things into your cell. So really good stuff there. And let's see, how do we go about bringing our images and our description text view into each one of our cells? So for example, what I want to do is bring this element in and this element in as well. So some of my students, or a lot of my students, try to bring these image views by doing something like this, like cell.add subview of some kind of, image view thing. Yeah, image view. And you try to add this image view inside of that cell, but please do not do this. So definitely don't try this. It is a very bad idea, because what happens is every time you dequeue a cell and you recycle a cell, you don't want to keep on adding things inside of your cell, which is what this code will do. So instead, why don't we actually initialize everything while we're running the init frame code? So I'm going to go ahead and add in this bear paw image view at the very top by just doing a little bit of copying and pasting from our initial view controller code that has this bear image view. So in other words, I'm going to copy that bit of code, go back to the page cell, bring the bear image view in here, remove that comment, perhaps. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And then inside of view controller, we have viewDidLoad, which is, oh boy, it's somewhere down here. And we're calling setup layout that helps us set up the bear image view and this description text view. So you kind of see we have this top container that allows us to support the half height sizing of this top component. And then we have the bear image view being anchored and also this description stuff. So I'm going to remove some of the comments here. And let's see. I'm just going to copy and paste this whole thing called setup layout. So I'll go back to my page cell, and somewhere down here I like to put these functions below the init code. And you'll see that some of this code does not compile for us. And because we're not really looking at the description text view yet, I'm going to just comment that out. And then I'll deal with these components here, or these lines of code which really needs to be fixed. So setup layout is already inside of this page cell. So we're calling setup layout perhaps down here, setup layout. And because we're already inside of a page cell, which is a view, we don't need any of these views. And previously these views were referring to the view controller's view. So in here, I'm just going to remove all of these view guys. And you'll see how very simple this is to fix. So remove that. And now we can run our code. I think I can remove this background color of yellow. It's not really what I want. So let's remove that and run our code again. You already saw that the bear paw image view was already inside of my page cell. And if I keep swiping over like that, you'll see that each one of these bear paws are inside of the top section of the page cell. So really good stuff there, and I'll remove some of the comments that I don't need anymore. And so this description text view, which is all that's remaining for us to add in, which is this over here, is pretty simple to do by sort of repeating what we just did for the bear image view. Go back to the view controller class. Let's see, let's pull up the description text view like that. And let's remove some of these comments that we don't need. I'm going to copy the description text view, go back to the page cell. Right below the bear image view, we can allow this description text view to be defined and initialized like that. So really good stuff there. And all we're missing is the anchoring code, which I'm going to uncomment in setup layout. So setup layout sets up all the layouts for our cell. And I'm going to anchor the description view onto the left anchor of the cell, and then the right anchor of the cell, and then the bottom anchor of the cell. That's what this means right there. So if you try to run this, your code's going to crash, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. And the reason why I kind of expected to crash is because I've done this already. So it says down here, because, well, let's just try to figure out exactly what this says. Unable to activate constraint with Anchorage UI text view. Join us today, blah, blah, blah. And you can't really do this because they have no common ancestor. And you'll often run into this error when you have not added your UI components into your view hierarchy just yet. And that's what it means when there's no common ancestor. It's trying to anchor the, let's see, description view top anchor right here. It's trying to anchor onto the top image container, which is somewhere down here. And it's not able to do so because it's not in the same view hierarchy yet, so it'll crash on you. Okay, so that's kind of what you need to get your controller up and running with all of your pages like this. So really good stuff. All right, so that's going to be it for today's lesson. I really hope you enjoyed how to implement this paging swiping feature inside of your iOS application. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to take a look at how to include the UI page controller, and the next button all the way at the bottom, which will allow us to use that as sort of the HUD or the control for our swipeable walkthrough feature. Okay. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video. Make sure to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel. If you want to learn more about iOS and Swift development, you can check out the Instagram Firebase course down in the description below. That's going to be it from me today. Keep on coding out there, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye, guys.